Okay, I've titled tonight's talk, Streams in the Desert, Indigenous Church Planting, the Special Ops of Church Planting. Now, let's clarify a few things. Indigenous means that you are trying to raise up the church from the local population. So you're not coming in with a large gathering and just going to sit there and figure that it's all going to be okay, but you're going to raise up the church from the local population. That's what indigenous means. So indigenous church planting is raise up the local population. The special ops of church planting. You know, there are some times when it works best to take 10, 20 families, maybe more than that, into a region in order to establish a presence there. We can be thankful that many of our forefathers did that when they came here, because they probably would have not survived if they had not done that. But sometimes it is better, or sometimes you do it by requirement, you don't have enough people, you have to go in small teams, the special ops. You're all familiar probably with special ops military-wise, and so I'm going to borrow some analogies from the military special ops from around the world and how they approach their operations, their mission. And I think there's something for us to learn from that. Now, when I got into church planting a number of years ago, we didn't have things like this. I had to get my information from other sources. And one of the places I studied a lot was military, because I said, we are in a battle. So what can I learn from military tactics that have been done throughout the ages, maybe how to do some things and how not to do some things? What can we learn from them as we enter in a spiritual battle? And these are going to be some of the things that I learned over the years from military ops. First thing, before we get into it, the question is, how do we know where we're supposed to be, if we're supposed to stay or supposed to go, move on, is a question that I still wrestle with every day. This phrase here came to me a number of years ago. I was probably about 15, 16 years old. I was working for my dad's electrician, and we were working in a house similar to this, rough wiring it, and the plumber moves in. And plumbers, I don't know what's with plumbers, but they always think they have to have a loud boom box. Some of you are chuckling before I said that because you knew what I was going to say. A loud boom box going with their favorite blend of something for us all to enjoy, or at least to endure. I like quiet. I don't like noise. I don't really like people that much. I like quiet. And this plumber really irritated me with his booming boombox going all day long. And one day he showed up with a new boombox. Oh, I guess the old one wasn't good enough. But as I walked past it, I realized that there was static. It just went to static. Well, that was strange. So I walked past it again, static. Every time I walked past that radio, it went to static mode. And soon I realized it was my cell phone. Now, if you're a 16-year-old boy and you want to get rid of some music and you know what gets rid of it, you might have the same thoughts I did. I dropped my phone in the box and kicked it over beside the radio. And the radio went to static. And I went off to wire the bedroom. Well, that plumber soon came in from the garage, and he realized his radio wasn't working right. He tries to adjust a little bit. Finally, he lets out a row of curses and turns his radio off. And I had peace and quiet. It was good. Until the last phrase that came out of that radio stuck with me for the last 25 years. And you might know this song. I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to put rhythm it because it's not a good song. But the last words was, should I stay or should I go? And that phrase, linked with the rhythm and the melody, has hounded me ever since. And very rarely does a week go past, I would say very rarely does a day go past, that I don't face that question with that rhythm and with that music. It's dangerous to turn a song off halfway through. It sticks with you. Well, that song has stuck with me. And so tonight's talk of how do we know when the stream in the desert has dried up and it's time to move on, and how do we know when to keep going because the rains will come again? That is a hard question because I wrestled with it so many times. And most days, you answer that question with, I'll stay for another day. I'll stay for another week. Because if you answer it, I go, all of a sudden your life changes, and changes dramatically. Most days you answer, stay. This man here is often considered the father of special operations. And I'm just going to do something here to try to get my notes back up here again. David Sterling, this is his name. If you don't know his name from now, it doesn't matter, because we're in a different battle than he is. but he was a British soldier during World War II, stationed in North Africa. And he realized that while the soldiers, the big armies, weren't really getting any progress in their fight, he could take a couple men and go behind enemy lines and create a lot of damage. Far more than they would ever create if they were going on head-to-head battles. And so he did. He got these jeeps, outfitted them with a lot of guns, with fuel tanks, a lot of explosives, and he would head off. On his first mission, he went into an airfield and rigged all the planes up with explosives, got out of there quickly. A bunch of them blew up. There was gunfire. Nobody was hit. He goes back in after it all is settled down and demolishes the rest of the planes that he had missed. And they all got away unscathed. Not a single person on either side lost their life that night, but there was 30 or 40 airplanes that would never fly again. And out of that, he said, if we created a team, many teams doing what we're doing here, we could win this war with a lot less casualties, a lot less damage. And so he formed the SAS, the Special Air Service, and all the other special ops kind of patterned back to him and to the things that he created. So what are some of the things that I've learned from studying his tactics and studying people who have worked with his tactics? Well, number one, you have to surrender everything if you're going to be part of his crew. See that man there? He's getting his hair cut. Now, many of you live in a city and you may know how long that young man worked to grow that hair. He was probably 13, 14 last time he had a haircut. And he worked hard on that hair, and he took care of it, and he was somebody special because of his hair. If I know the culture, and I think I do, he's somebody special because he has that hair. But he signs up, and the first thing he does is he loses his hair. If we're going to serve in God's army, especially in the special ops, doesn't matter, wherever in God's army, we have to be willing to give up everything. Even the thing that he treasured the most, even his hair, we have to be willing to give up. We have to give up our rights. Many times our rights are something that, I deserve this. No. If we're going to join God's kingdom, it's giving up the rights. Our desires, preferences, all of that has to be laid at Jesus' feet if we're going to serve him. Even the understanding of what our mission is. We may think we know what our mission is, but even understand what our mission is has to be laid at Jesus' feet and says, Lord, whatever. I will do it. And maybe even our hairstyle. Probably most of us don't have to give up our hairstyle, but think of something equivalent to that. Something that you really like, something that you worked hard for. You may have to lay that down too in order to serve where God wants you to serve. Unless we surrender and say, I will go everywhere, anywhere, wherever you want me, no matter what, I'm not even going to ask where to go before I agree. Unless we approach life first with that surrender, we are dead in the water. There's nothing left to go off of. So once we get that point of surrender, and hopefully we're all there, if not, don't leave until you get there because you're wasting your time from here on out, then the mission achievement depends upon a few things. And if you don't have those few things lined up, there will be no chance that the mission that was intended will survive. The first is, what is the health and well-being of the soldiers? You could even say the training, the commitment. What kind of soldiers do we have? Are our soldiers prepared for the fight? Are we prepared for the fight? If we're not, it's not going to be successful. You have to be prepared. You have to be trained. You have to be disciplined. That's part of being a soldier. Do we have sufficient resources? You know, if Davy Sterling would have decided he was going to go take down all those airplanes with nothing but a 6-shooter in his hip, he would have had no success. They would have taken out one, but no success. But he had the resources he needed. Do we have the resources that we need in order to obtain the mission, to complete the mission? Now, third, is the mission attainable? You know, there are limits of what is attainable. We have a God who can do anything, but he doesn't expect us to be God. He gives us limits. And sometimes the limits will make it that the mission is not obtainable. Maybe we don't understand the mission, but the mission might not be attainable. And then lastly, is there a clarity of mission? And this is what often catches us. When we're questioning, should we stay or go? Do we have a clear understanding of what the mission is? Does the team have a clear understanding of what the mission is? If there's not a clear understanding, that mission is not going to be successful. It's just the simple part. Now, these are things that I pulled from the Army, from Special Ops. Yes, God can come in and do anything he wants. We'll talk about that a little later. But he normally doesn't. He normally uses the resources that he has and that he has in his church. And so, yes, he can give quail, but how many times does he give quail in the Old Testament? A few times, not a lot. Most of the time, he gives the resources to us, and then he tells us to put it to use. And so, yes, God can change things, but many times he will go with what he has. Health and well-being. A couple areas I think of here is physical health. When Jeremiah was in the well, sick, diseased, and he really had nothing left to give. He was not able to continue preaching. There's nobody else around. His mission was dead in the water. And sometimes physical health will cause us to not have any more mission. I've been there. Sometimes there's nothing left to give physically. Mental health. I think of Elijah on Mount Carmel. He was at the end. He was taxed. He was done. And he runs down, finds out that his life is threatened. He runs in the wilderness, maxed out mentally. The cells weren't clicking anymore. And he goes out there to die. Now, why would you run all day long because somebody's trying to kill you just so you can go and die? That's not a logical thing to do. But he does that because he's so overwhelmed mentally, he can no longer accomplish the mission of being a prophet of God. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes we have to go to a place of rest like Elijah did so that God can restore us and give us the mission back. And I think of spiritual health. And I was trying to think of a time when somebody was really maxed out spiritually. And I was struggling to find one, but I think probably Jesus' time in the wilderness is a time when his spiritual health was at an all-time low. He was hungry. He was maxed out mentally, physically. And that's when Satan said, I've got my best chance. So he was probably at his lowest spiritually. And Jesus had a different response than Elijah did. He was able to overcome in that moment. What is our spiritual health like? If our spiritual health if we're not healthy spiritually, we are not prepared to continue on with the mission. And sometimes we get run down spiritually, and something needs to change. Talking about sufficient resources. Is there sufficient workers? You know, when I started in the church planting, almost all of our church planting teams was one couple or one single going into the city and trying to start a church. And the death rate was horrendous. Very few survived 5 years with their original mission. Most of them gave up, went back home. The ones that didn't give up and go back home, most of those joined local churches and left everything that they took there to develop, left it all behind. Sometimes if there's not sufficient workers, then God might not be telling you to go right now or to stay right now. Do you have sufficient mental and spiritual support? If you don't, you're going to be the next casualty. And so either develop that, or sometimes it's a retreat to go find it. And then sufficient material resources. You know, we can go without food for a while, but eventually you got to eat. Eventually it's pretty nice to have a home to live in. And if the financial resources are not there, sometimes you got to give up and move on. That does happen. Church planting requires steady grit. But grit alone will not accomplish the mission. Sometimes the things outside of our own control, external things, will doom the mission. So is the mission attainable? Is the objective, what you thought was the objective, is it still attainable? I have seen already where people went into an area planning on doing something, and over time, the population changes. And if you go into a city like Reading right now to plant English-speaking church, in the last 15 years, it has turned very heavily Hispanic. And you might struggle. We're members at a church in Harrisburg, and it was a church to evangelize the neighborhood. But then a flood came and took the neighborhood away, and now it's an industrial zone. that mission to evangelize that neighborhood is not attainable anymore. There's nobody there. Sometimes the mission shifts. And is the casualty rate acceptable? Anytime the military thinks of an operation, they deem what they think is an acceptable casualty rate. And it might seem strange to us to say, it's okay if 10 people die. Okay, it seems strange to us, but they're saying it's worth it for that cause. Is the casualty rate acceptable? Now, a couple casualty rates that are acceptable. First, physical casualty rate is acceptable. It's okay for us to go there and die. And if we're not okay with that, we need to go back to the first slide, or the second slide. Are we willing to lay everything down for Christ? It's okay for us to go there and die physically. It is even, I'm going to make this point, it is even okay to go there and die mentally or have a mental collapse. That is okay. Not desirable. And we got to try not to let that happen. But we have to say, God, you may have my mind. One casualty rate we can't be okay with is a spiritual casualty rate. And if we're going to die spiritually in order to accomplish mission, that's not okay. And the graveyards are littered with missionaries who went on the mission field, got bitter at God, and died spiritually. They just are. And that's not a casualty rate we can say that's acceptable. So we get to that point where you have to find some way to guard against the casualties. I had a friend growing up one time when I was younger, and he was trying to evangelize Muslims. And got that close to being converted. And it was only because some other people around him saw what was going on that they pulled him out and worked long and hard to restore his faith. But at some point in time, we have to say, this is not a safe place spiritually for me, and I need to get some help. That casualty rate is not okay. Yeah, we lay down our rights to health and safety, but Jesus does not ask us to leave him in order to win some for him. That's not an acceptable casualty rate. And what is the mission clarity? Now, when you go to a city, most of us, or a town, or wherever you move to, most of us have an idea of what we want to get and want to have happen there, what we want to accomplish. But many times that mission starts, that dream, that mission starts to fade over time or get tweaked a little bit. It's not a bad idea to write that down before you get there so you can double check yourself in 5 years. It's not a bad idea. And if that mission drift happens, especially if the mission drifts among the team, and some drift this way, some drift that way, and you get this mission drift, there's only two options. Either a renewal of mission unity, of clarity of mission, or mission separation. That's kind of your two options. Eventually, it will be separation. If you don't have a renewal, it will be separation. When I think of renewal, I had to think of Israel. Moses dismisses the two and a half tribes to go across the Jordan River. And when they go across the river, they build an altar on the bank. And the side on Judah's side said, what? They're going to serve heathen gods. They gather all their forces up to go to kill all their brethren off. And they get there and they talk a little bit. Fortunately, before they start throwing spears, they started throwing words. And they talk a little bit and they said, well, we're not really trying to walk from God, but we are concerned that future generations, your children, will say we have no part with God because we're on this side of the Jordan and won't let us come over. And so we put this monument here, this altar here, so that everybody would know we are part of you and we have not walked away. That's a restoring of mission unity. And the Bible says that the ones on the main side, they went home rejoicing that they did not have to kill 2.5 tribes. Sometimes that mission drift requires, or it can be renewed, and you can get that mission back together again. Sometimes it just seems you can't bring it back together again. And you don't necessarily have to say you're living in sin or you've walked away from God, but our mission has drifted apart. And hopefully that's where you can go with it. Many times we tend to throw barbs and we think that the other person has walked away, but let's try to separate, saying simply mission drift. Paul and Barnabas over the John Mark issue, I don't think Paul for a moment thought that Barnabas was no longer a Christian. I don't think he did. I don't think Barnabas for a moment thought that Paul had left the faith. I think they both had disagreements about how the mission should be accomplished. But they went apart in sharp disagreement, but probably a lot of respect for each other. And that's what the mission has to separate. Let's try to get that together. We know that Paul thought highly of John Mark later. And I'm going to guess, though it's not spelled out quite so clearly, that thinking of John Mark did go back to Barnabas as well. And he thought highly of Barnabas as well. Sometimes our mission, what we think is our mission, our clarity, is not God's mission. And I just love the story of Philip. He's in Samaria. He's preaching. People are coming to Christ in droves, like most of us have probably not experienced. And God tells him, go take a walk in the wilderness. He walks out in the wilderness, to the desert, and he meets one man, Ethiopian eunuch. He leads him to Christ, introduces him to who Jesus is, the Messiah is, baptizes him. Just like that, Philip is gone, and the Ethiopian eunuch continues on to Ethiopia. Probably never to hear of Philip again, or Philip to hear of him again, most likely. Maybe they did. Now, we don't know exactly how the Ethiopian church got its origin, but most accounts lay a good portion of it at the feet of the Ethiopian eunuch. We don't know for sure, but most accounts leave at least a good portion for it there. And while Philip thought he was having success in Samaria, that was nothing compared to what happened in Ethiopia. Sometimes our mission is not what we thought it was. Elisha's student, his mission was to lose an axe head. That's all we know about. You could say in the historical record, God put him here to lose an axe head in the water so that Elisha could throw a stick in and let that thing float. Now, you thought you were living in a small town and had a small mission. Imagine having a mission of nothing bigger than to lose an axe head. Yeah, sometimes our mission is not what we thought it was. The blind man that Jesus healed, disciples ask him, is he blind because of his sin or somebody else's sin? And Jesus says, nay. But, and I'm going to put my words together here, you can read it and you see where I'm coming from. He was blind so that Jesus could heal him. And by healing him, people would see that the blind see. One of the markers that they would know this was the Messiah was when the blind see. And that man was born blind, grew up from a little baby, blind, never seen a flower bloom or a tree sheds leaves. Hard life. Just so Jesus could heal him and demonstrate to everyone around him that Jesus is the Messiah. And you think your handicap or your area of struggle is rough. Jesus could have done it any other way. He could have found, there's lots of blind people. He could have found somebody that lost his eyesight last week. But no, this man lived all his life as a blind person simply so Jesus could heal him. And Job's children, their mission was to be born, to raise, but their real mission was to die. Die so that God could show his power and show who he is to Job, to Satan, and to us. Maybe your mission is not to go plant a church, but to struggle there all your life, die as a faithful witness, so that others will see this is how a godly person dies. Maybe that's your mission. We went to Hamilton 15 years ago, something like that, 14 years ago. Our idea was to plant churches. Church on every block. Didn't happen. There's no Anabaptist church there today. And sometimes I look back at that and say, what was the point? Yes, I learned a lot, God. But I could learn that anywhere. Why did I have to go there? Maybe it was so Cheryl would find God. Maybe that's the only reason I went there. Maybe I didn't understand what the mission was. And God was just using the idea of church planting to get me there. I don't know. We don't always know what the mission is. Yes, it is good to have a clear idea of what you are intending to do. If you don't have a clear idea, you're just going to flounder around and not get anything done. But don't be surprised if what we think is the mission is not what God is planning for the mission. Do we stay or do we go? That's a question that we probably all have wrestled with many times.
Okay.
And to start off with, it has to be a point of submission.
It's fine.
I don't care, God, where if you stay where to go, you do with me what you want. It has to start there. And then sometimes we just have to look at it and say, is the materials in place, all things in place that we can stay? I've heard many times, well, the idea of peace. If you have peace in staying and peace of leaving, I don't know if I can almost ever point to a point in time where I said I have total peace in staying or leaving. That's not been my experience. If it's been yours, praise God. It's not been mine. Me, it was always, I don't know, God. Maybe you want me to stay, maybe you want me to go. And at some point, it just became obvious that it's not sustainable to stay or it's not sustainable to go. And that's what has governed for us for the most part of when we went or when we didn't go. Okay, David, turn it over to you.
So I'm going to be extending what
Jason.
Jason just spoke about, if I can remember his name, and taking some other things to weigh on, is it time to reset or maybe even to shut down? So it's not always a question of, okay, do we close the mission? Is this the end? Is it not working? Often what is needed is to reset. In other words, this may be a very workable mission. It's just maybe what's happening is needs to get adjusted for things to work. Other times, yeah, it is time to shut down. Now we're going to be looking at 4 factors. Now these are mainly involving, so he was talking about special ops, okay? So we're taking it to the next level. Let's assume your church plant has grown a bit. Either you started out maybe with more families, or it has grown a bit, and you run into some issues. Okay, major theological differences is one. Differences in spiritual culture, and I'll explain that when we get there. Maybe a change in leadership is needed. And then what about when no fruit is being produced? Okay, so these are 4 things to weigh. And like I say, it may require shutting the mission down, but I'd say more often than not, it just means resetting some things. So let's start first with major theological differences. For example, and when I'm saying theological differences, I don't mean that you've got a different view on this issue or that. I'm talking about something pretty big that's going to affect the entire flavor of the church. And evangelical Protestant versus Anabaptist. Now, we often work together with evangelical Protestants. We don't view them as non-Christians or that. But there is a considerable difference between what Anabaptists believe and what evangelical Protestants. Now, sometimes that gets kind of merged, but just tell you about our experience in Chambersburg. Go back here. So, our church, we got going. I forget how many families we were at that point. We were attracting a number of people. We didn't have a lot of members. I'm going to say 6-member families, maybe 7. And things were going well, but we also had a lot of visiting families. And many of these were from the local area. And some of them were from Brethren in Christ. How many of you are familiar with Brethren in Christ? Okay, so there's a lot in our area of Chambersburg. And their origin is back in the 1700s. They were Mennonites who were very influenced by the Great Awakening and decided, let's join with that, and yet let's keep our Anabaptist. So they were a hybrid of Anabaptist and evangelical. And after 200 years today, they're basically just evangelical Protestants. There's almost no Anabaptism left to them. A few little traces, and it would depend. There are some conservative ones. So we had attracted a number of them. The standards in our church probably are stricter than, I'm going to guess, a lot of the churches that you're part of. But they're not as strict as some churches like Pilgrim or some of the Beachies. And so Yeah, it wasn't our mission to attract people from Anabaptist churches. In fact, that's not how we want to grow, but, we're not going to tell somebody go away. And so we did attract people who, our standards aren't quite as strict, so maybe this is a place they can settle in. And some of these were from brethren in Christ. Okay, so what would happen in Sunday school is we would have this mini war going on. So the brother conducting Sunday school would ask a question, and some of us would give an answer, and then there would be a counter answer coming. Usually, they generally sat in the back. I was usually sitting in the front, so often I was answering the question, but there were other brothers as well. And then we'd hear this other answer in the back, and then it would go back and forth. And they were giving a Protestant answer, I was giving an Anabaptist answer, and there was this conflict. Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. I mean, this just kept going on. And that was a minor annoyance. We thought we could live with it. It wasn't constructive because you came to Sunday school and you didn't know, well, what is the right answer? Because you heard a couple of different answers. On some things there are some, more than one valid answer. But, then we found that it went a little deeper than we realized, at least that the elders realized. So one of these families, their particular mission was to convince people that the Anabaptist route was legalism and that they were into works righteousness. And so what they were doing, unknown to the elders, was some of the new families, some of the visitors, they were getting with them. They had a book, wasn't able to get a picture of it, that they were handing them that was basically saying that we as Anabaptists are, all bound up in legalism and get your freedom. And then there was a CD set that they were handing out to these people, not publicly. This was all behind the leaders' backs, okay? The mistake they made was a new family that had joined the church, Daniel Willis and his wife. He was very well grounded in what we believe and very much embraced it. So, they gave him the book and the CDs. He was teaching Sunday school at that point in time, as it turned out, and he listened to this stuff. So the next Sunday, it was actually, I guess it was a Saturday when this happened. So the next day on Sunday, in his Sunday school, he gave a refutation of this book. He did a PowerPoint showing where it was in error, and the family that had been handing it out, Midway Sunday School, they got up and walked out and didn't come back. And then several of the families who had been kind of following them, they eventually left. Now, we're glad that happened. It was like, we can't, this is not a sustainable church. You can't have this big of a difference with half of us believing that Jesus does require us to live faithfully to his commandments. Not to get saved initially, you don't have to bring any works to your initial salvation, but Christ does expect us to live obediently to him after we have been saved. You can't really mix that with somebody saying that's all works righteousness. It's not pleasing to God. You're in bondage and you need to get away from that. So anyway, as a result, like I say, it worked out. God worked things out for us, actually the way it happened. And we realized as elders, we need to have a clear vision. Part of it, they could honestly say, well, we didn't know we were contradicting anything. You don't have a statement of what you believe or that. So we realized we needed to make it clear what our church vision was and what our belief system. And whatever church, your church, make it clear what your vision is, what you stand for. We don't have a detailed doctrinal statement still, but we do have a detailed, clear vision of what our church is about. You might call it deep-rooted Anabaptism. So we saw a lot of the problems. So many Anabaptists are hybrid creatures. They're half Anabaptist and they're half Protestant, and it's all mixed together. And so we shared that we're going back to what Anabaptists believed in the beginning 500 years ago. And then as people came into our church from non-plain backgrounds, they said, well, so what's special about 500 years ago? Why should I believe Michael Sattler instead of Martin Luther or John Calvin? And we said, good point. So we ran our roots even deeper back to the historic faith. What did they believe in the time right after the apostles? How did they understand the New Testament, which conveniently happens to be almost exactly how the Anabaptists understand it. So, yeah, we were able to show that our belief system, it doesn't just go back 500 years. This is the historical faith. There's a couple differences, but not very many. So, they really actually helped us to clarify our vision. But, make sure your church knows what it stands for, or, the same thing could happen there. So we didn't have to shut down the church. We just had to reset and realize, okay, we haven't had it clear, and we need to make it clear. Okay, second problem, differences in spiritual culture. And I'm going to give you two examples of what I mean. Okay, one is charismatic versus non-charismatic. So I've been part of two church plants. One is the one I'm part of right now in Chambersburg, but 25 years before it, I was part of a church plant in Texas. And we started out, it was just me and another brother. And we grew very rapidly, not because I'm a church planter, not because I'm an evangelist. I write books. Okay, so people would read my book and say, hey, they would imagine David Bercot must be some unusual, this guru. And I would tell them, look, believe me, I'm just an ordinary person. You're not going to find me any, deeper spiritually than probably the people around you. They thought, wow, this guy is even humble on top of everything else, So, well, they eventually realized, no, I was telling them the truth. But anyway, so in 6 months' time, we had 12 to 14 families there. And we all believed pretty much the same thing. That was nice. But what we had were two different cultures. So a bunch of the people who came were charismatically oriented. For them, that was normal. And then the others were not charismatic. And those are two cultures I don't think you can mix together in one church. Now, if you can do it, fine. It doesn't mean one has to be right or the other one wrong. Well, I guess it does, but it doesn't mean one group are non-Christians and the others are Christians, okay? But it's a little hard. So we had people in our church who believed that they were prophets, okay? And, God would give them these revelations and all of these insights on things. And, what we were doing wrong as leaders and what we should be doing this and that. And they were very vocal about it. And that appealed to those from charismatic backgrounds. It's like, okay, good, we've got some prophets here among us. This is wonderful. The problem is David Bercot wasn't a prophet. I wasn't one of them. So pretty soon these prophets, came to me and the other leader, and they said, you're holding back the congregation. You guys are down here spiritually, and we're up here spiritually. This is literal. This is what they told us. You're down here spiritually. We're up here. You're holding everyone down to your level, and suggested we might want to step down. Good enough. We suggested maybe we need to part ways. So it was very amicable, but we had a meeting one Sunday afternoon and said, there's just no way, there's just too big of a difference, and we're not going to be able to work together. Either you all believe you're prophets, that you've got this revelation, we don't, and so therefore you look down on us as being unspiritual. We don't look down on you as being unspiritual. We just think, well, I didn't go any further, but anyway, we think you're a little misguided. So anyway, we decided, it's just best if we part ways. Like I said, we were able to do it amicably, and fortunately, it was it was like a 1/3, 2/3 split. So there was enough to have two churches out of that, small churches, and we both, went on. They went on to find a real prophet or someone, greater, that they were convinced this guy was the real thing, and he had all kinds of pretty strange teachings, and they all followed him, moved to Tennessee, and I don't want to badmouth them, but anyway, it was a little different than, let's say, what our congregation back in Tyler, Texas was teaching. But that was fine. But I felt like that's where things were headed. I mean, once you're going to go there and somebody's a prophet and they've got revelation and all of that the Bible isn't going to be our final source, then, yeah. So I would say when you run into that, address it early on. I've never regretted, like I said, this was just 6 months into the church plant. I have never regretted that we did that. I mean, I hated it, but Dean Taylor was there with me. We've talked about it many times over the years since then, because that was, 30-something years ago. And we both say, yeah, no regret. That was absolutely the right move. It would have just been disaster if we had carried on. So that would be my advice. When you're in a situation that's irreconcilable, if you can reconcile differences, do that. But sometimes, yeah, you're just talking about two different cultures that aren't going to work together very well. Okay, another example would be an Anabaptist church who, let's say, their spirituality involves very strict standards, trying to plant a church together with Anabaptists who would favor very few standards. Okay, now normally this doesn't happen in a church plant because the ones with strict standards, let's say Eastern or Pilgrim, they're not going to do a church plant with somebody who's not part of their conference. But you could run into that, say, among Beachies, because there are quite a variation. You could run into it here. You might meet different people here and say, hey, let's do a church plant. Mine's not working out too well. Let's get together. And that's fine. Make sure you're on the same plane. I mean, you don't have to agree on every standard, but you should have an idea of what your general spirituality is going to be. Is it going to be no standards, a few standards? Is it going to be clear, written out, maybe fairly strict standards? I'm not saying there's a right or wrong to any of them. It's just you're not going to work together very well if you're at a clash all the time on that. Okay? Again, address it early on if you can. When you see some of these things, and yeah, if you can work through it, great. Okay, number 3, change in leadership may be needed. So if your church plant isn't thriving, you don't necessarily need to shut it down. Maybe, again, a reset is needed. Change in leadership might be what will do it. Now, here's the hard part. You may be the hindrance, okay? So you may be the one who planted the church. And it may turn out, really your gift isn't being a pastor. You may be doing okay, but maybe that's not really your calling. A lot of these things you don't know until you're doing them, what your gifts are. And if you're in that situation, I would really encourage you, be humble enough to admit it. This happened to me in Texas, okay? So here, I plant the church. The people come there because they've read my books. Of course, after a while, they found out, well, this guy isn't this deep spiritual. He's just like the rest of us, which I had tried to tell them. Anyway, and found out that he's not that great of a pastor, and they wanted somebody else, and voted, somebody else in place of me. Okay. Obviously, something like that hurts, but I accepted that as from the Lord. Maybe that isn't my gift. I thought I was capable as a pastor, but my experience had been pastoring as a JW. It's a very different experience. You've got a whole organization behind you when you're an elder as a Jehovah's Witness. You don't have to have particular gifts because you've got all of this authority like a Catholic priest, behind you. In just a house church, it's very different. You don't have that. And so, whether you have the gifts of a pastor or not are going to matter a lot. So that was really good for me. I learned from that, okay, I've learned something about myself. The other brother was definitely, I would say, a better pastor, more gifted than me. And the church did well. We just made that adjustment. He stepped in as pastor and, bishop, and I stepped out. And everything went well. Now, the irony, after, I think, 5 years, he felt called to go to the mission field. And to my great surprise, he recommended to the congregation that I take his place as bishop. So they ended up voting me back in. I don't know if that was a good choice or not, but I was glad that I hadn't fought it when they felt I needed to step down. Like I say, no one likes that to happen. But if you're in that situation, I would just really encourage you. Just accept that as maybe the Lord speaking through the congregation. And we all learn about ourselves. Like I say, God doesn't give you a list. It doesn't fall down from heaven. Here are your spiritual gifts, blah, blah, blah. You often don't know until you're in the situation what gifts you do have or don't have. And so I learned from that, and I've tried to remember that to this day. Okay, the last one, when a church plant is not producing lasting fruit. Again, the answer may not be that you've got to close down at all. So I'm not going to talk about my experience in Dallas, but I'll talk a little bit about our experience in Chambersburg. So when we started out 10 years ago, we knew we wanted to evangelize the city of Chambersburg. We didn't have a clear map, how we were going to do this. We just had the desire, the enthusiasm, and the conviction this is what God wanted. We didn't have to be specially called by God because we've all been given the Great Commission. As every Christian, we are called to go out and make disciples. So, we were fulfilling that. And we were renting a church building. We were downtown, inner city. And we had a brother there who had started an inner city mission of having Bible studies twice a week, a free meal, and then a Bible study. And so we thought, well, we'll get behind that and support that. And because we were the closest church connected to that, there were other churches supporting that, not just ours, but we were the closest church to the mission. So they would come to our congregation on Sunday. And you can get misled very easily, because when you're doing inner city work, if you're giving out freebies, you can attract people fast. And, pretty soon, we had a lot of people in the congregation. It felt really good. But how many of them were seriously interested in the gospel and becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ? How many of them liked the freebies, a free meal? So often they had needs. They'd come Sunday and I need some money for gas. Could you take me to my doctor's appointment on such and such a day? I need rent money, things like that. And so we felt good that we were getting people, and we stuck with it for 3 years. And we could see none of these people are making any progress towards becoming serious disciples. They're right where they started, still wanting the free meals and all that. And they would come for a while and then get tired and go some other mission, and then new people would come. But, we weren't making any permanent disciples. So after 3 years, we realized, okay, we need to push the reset button and try a different means of evangelism. And one of the things we started, I'd mentioned as a Jehovah's Witness, who are very effective in evangelism, is we start home Bible studies with people. That's how you convert somebody, particularly if you're doing more than just getting them to invite Jesus in their heart and say the sinner's prayer. If you want to make a real disciple, you're going to have a home Bible study with them and, go through the scriptures in a serious way. So we started a home Bible study, Kevin and I, at his house, and we had different people coming to that. We also, it very much surprised us, since we were working on this inner city mission, that we had several families come. And, well, how did you find us? Oh, on the internet. They found Scroll Publishing, and then found out, they asked, where does David Bercot go to church? Oh, Chambersburg. Chambersburg, that's where I live, And so we realized, wow, the people who actually were very interested and are still with us for the most part found us on the internet. And, you know, we did a little bit of reading, and it turned out that's the norm nowadays. When somebody is seeking a church, even if they go by a church and they say, boy, that church looks interesting, before they'll visit on the first Sunday, most of the time they'll go to the internet and go to the website of that church and read about it. So we thought, let's really make a push to evangelize, to have a presence through the internet. And that's what we have done. And it has proved to be a very effective tool for evangelism. I'm not saying it's the answer for everybody. And, you know, some of your churches may have standards against, YouTube or something like that. But for us, it's been, very effective. So, yeah, we just reset. And, as a result, we now have a healthy church. We've got, Kevin, 52 members now? Something like that. Everyone in my church is looking at me. Did I come up with a fake figure? That's correct?
Close.
It's close. Low or high?
54.
54. Okay, thank you. So, and I'm not saying that in any way boastful. I'm just saying, if we had continued on the same pattern, we probably wouldn't have any. We'd still be giving the free meals, being the servants of these people. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're there to make disciples and to grow a church. And that wasn't happening. And so, if you see whatever you may need to target a different demographic, whatever it is, and try a different method, Don't necessarily assume that, okay, the mission is just a failure, or that this ground is the hard ground that no seeds are going to grow in. You may just need to change your method. Now, I know of a church plant. It's 20 years old, unfruitful. They've made one convert in 20 years, and he's since gone back to Protestant. That's it after 20 years. Now, to me, it's time to think, wow, is this wise, okay? How many of you, and I'm not surprised if you haven't, how many of you have heard of the sunk cost? Oh my word, I'm embarrassed because I hadn't heard of it. Okay, so I'll explain what it is because I had to look it up, okay? The sunk cost fallacy often causes people to continue a ministry or church plant even when ending it would be the wiser course of action, okay? You could maybe see, if you looked at it logically, it's wiser to close this. But you stick with it because they have invested a lot of time, energy, or other resources in a ministry project. They feel that it will all have been for nothing if they quit now, okay? We've sunk all of these costs. If we quit now, all of that has been wasted. The problem is, it's already been spent. That shouldn't play in your present decision. So they keep pursuing an unfruitful church plant even when there is little hope for success, because they wrongly imagine that stopping now equates to failure. Okay? It doesn't. If you invest years preaching in a certain area, trying to plant a church, and nothing happens, you're not a failure. All right? You have preached the gospel. You have done what Jesus said. You've done more than the vast majority of Christians have done. You have gone out, as he said, and tried to make disciples, okay? It could be that isn't your gift. That isn't your calling to be an evangelist. Nothing to be ashamed of there. You tried, you don't know until you go out and evangelize to find out what your gifts are. It may be just territory that nobody would be successful with the group that you are working with. God can use that to teach you a lot about yourself. I mean, nothing is ever wasted. There is nothing that happens to us in life that God cannot use to teach us an important lesson. So nothing is ever wasted. But because you've spent that time to say, well, I've got to just stay here or else that time's wasted, well, that time has been spent. If you haven't produced any fruit, I mean, this is a real church, 20 years. I mean, what makes you think it's going to be different tomorrow? I mean, nothing's going to change. I don't know if you can even read that. Sunk costs, okay? And this applies to business. It applies to a lot of things. Costs that have already been incurred by past actions. They cannot be recovered. They are not relevant to future decisions. If you've put a lot of money in a factory and the industry goes down, your decision of whether I should close the factory or not has nothing to do with, we've spent all of this money. It's whether is this going to succeed or not. One of the best examples of this that really surprised me at the time was Amazon. I don't know when this was, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Most of you may remember. They came out with a smartphone. How many of you remember that? 2 people. Well, I'll tell you why you don't remember it. Because it was a failure right out of the gate. It just bombed. And I don't know how long, who's the president? I would know his name if I wasn't up here, of Amazon. Steve Bezos. Yeah. I mean, it was like 6 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, 2 weeks. He pulled the plug just like that. When he saw this thing wasn't going to fly, he just pulled the plug. That's why most of you don't remember it. I mean, he saw this wasn't going to work, and they must have invested, hundreds of millions. And I remember thinking, this is the beginning of the end for Amazon. Boy, they just had a major failure. Turned out to be just the opposite. He made the right call. Didn't matter how much money we've put into this. It ain't going to work. We're not going to be able to compete against Apple and Samsung. And so we just end it. Doesn't matter we've spent all that money. We go forward with what works. Like I said, that was about 10 years ago. Whatever Amazon was worth then, it's worth a whole lot more now, So, it doesn't matter what you spent. That has no relevancy to should I go forward or not. You can't undo what has been done. So, don't think because, I don't know what these people are thinking on this church. 20 years. Are they thinking, we spent 20 years, we can't stop now? It's like, hey, there are other places you could try to plant the gospel. It's not working. Or different people are maybe what are needed. Okay, the God called me fallacy. God does call people, but a lot of people imagine they've been called by God when they haven't. It can be very subjective. In the Bible, it's, I think, always clear when someone is called by God. It's usually an audible voice. But it's very easy for us subjectively to decide God has called us to do something. So we can spend years trying to push this gigantic round stone up a mountain, and after 20 years we're still in the same spot and we've made no progress. But God called me to do this. Now somebody asked this brother on this church plant, why don't you just call it quits? His answer, God called me to do this. Maybe God didn't call you. If you spent 20 years in church planting and you haven't made any converts, could that maybe be that God didn't call you? You did the right thing. You obeyed, the Great Commission, but you may find, hey, that isn't your gift, or your approach isn't right, or maybe just the place you are isn't very fruitful. It could be any of those things. The false prophets who advised Jehoshaphat and Ahab, I'm going to guess they were certain God had called them. You're not going to go out and tell the king, he asked you, should I go into battle? And say, go, and you're just making it up, because what's going to happen to you if they lose the battle? Very likely he's going to come back and you are going to be put to death. Okay, so I'm going to guess those false prophets believed God had called them to be a prophet. They really believed, Ahab, go out there and you're going to win. You can be sincere, you can really believe God has called you, and be dead wrong like they were. Now, when God really does call you, Jonah would be, to me, the perfect example, because he didn't want to go. This wasn't his subjective thing. I think God wants me to go to Nineveh. He didn't want to go to Nineveh. In fact, God made it clear he was to go to Nineveh, and he went to Joppa instead, got on a boat, and headed the opposite direction. God had to perform a miracle and nearly cost Jonah his life. had to discipline him severely and then finally say, now you go to Nineveh, okay? Now, because Jonah was really called to go there, what was the result? I mean, do you realize Jonah is probably the most effective human evangelist ever? I mean, was it 120,000 people in Nineveh, if I remember correctly, who repented? 120,000. These were pagans. This is a prophet from the little country of Israel going to a major power and a major city in the world who were pagans, who were not Israelites, and they all repent. Paul never got those kind of results. So Jonah was truly called. He didn't want to go. So again, if God has truly called you to something, then yeah, it should be seen some kind of success going along with it. Now again, you may be just being obedient to Scripture. Nothing wrong with that. But at some point, yeah, you should look at a dry church plant that's going nowhere and think, maybe this isn't my calling. Maybe somebody else could come here and do better and I could work alongside of them. Or maybe my approach is wrong. But to sit back and say, well, God's called me to do this, so I'm sure he's going to do it until he eventually dies, And it's too bad because he's a good brother. He's a really good brother. He would be a nice brother in any congregation. I think he could play an important role instead of trying to do something he thinks he was called to do that the evidence would be all against him. Okay. So shutting down isn't necessarily the answer is probably the main thing I want to get across today. Now, again, if it's you being burnt out, that Jason was talking about, yeah, you may need to step out. Yeah, that's not necessarily negotiable. But the actual mission maybe can go on, depending, how crucial you are to it. But yeah, try seeing if resetting, let's try a different approach, see if that works, because you may have dramatically different results. And that happened in the wars that he was talking about, that, generals would try one thing and didn't get anywhere and then come back with a totally different tactic and have amazing success. And the same thing works in spiritual warfare. Okay, we're going to have a time of question and answers now.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, Jason. I'm sure you have questions to pose to them, and so this is an open time for that. Raise your hand, and I'll bring you the mic. Maybe you should specify who the question is intended for, of the two. Where? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Alvin. I didn't see it.
This is a question for David. I'm just wondering why I've seen this so often, we're so hesitant to evaluate a situation, like maybe it's a leadership position or a mission that we're on or something. We're very slow to evaluate. I just wonder what's driving that. Like we're I don't know, it feels almost shameful to do that.
Yeah, because we imagine it's not spiritual, and this is, I'd say, the evangelical pietistic influence among us. One of the things that really appealed to me when I was first around the Anabaptists, and there were some visitors who had been coming a number of Sundays, and we were sitting and talking with the bishop after the service, and I forget what the specific question was that led up to his answer. But they were talking about, well, God had told them to do this and that, etc. And he said, that's fine, but in the Anabaptist churches, we feel that God's will is determined by the voice of the church. And we look to the voice of the church to determine God's will rather than each of us individually deciding. Now, I'm not going to say that's always necessarily going to arrive at the right decision, but I like that because I'd spent 10 years as an evangelical, and I'd just seen people going zigzag across the map. Everybody, God told me to do this, God told me to do that. And they weren't able to submit or look objectively because everything was this subjective, pietistic feeling. So I think if we recognize it is not unspiritual. I mean, Jesus himself, he said, who goes out, if before, count the cost. And, king going out with an army, if he sees the other army is twice the size, he's going to sue for peace. He's not going to, go to war. So he told us that, we should look at practical measures himself. So it's not unspiritual to do that, but I think that is the problem. Or it could be just our own ego. We wanted to be, a church planter, and we maybe don't want to accept that maybe that isn't our gift. But again, we can work with other people. So as I said at the beginning, I'm not an evangelist and I'm not a church planter, but I'm part of an effective church plant right now, but it's not turning on me. It's turning on a lot of people working together, and people who have gifts that I don't have. But see, I can work alongside of them and bring what gifts I do have. So that's, I think all of us bringing the gifts we have together can make the difference.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that response, and I concur with the idea that we can sometimes get too much of a high opinion of ourselves and our callings and so forth. The question did come up while you were speaking about looking at this success or no success after 20 years. And I'm aware of stories where someone, let's say, labored hard for 20 years in a hard situation, and then maybe at 22, they finally got their first convert, and there was a huge blossoming after that. If they would have quit at 20, the 22-year blossom would have never happened. I also know stories where somebody labored all their life with no fruit, but then the people who took up the mantle after them got to see the results, and they never got to see it themselves. So I'm just curious, is there such a thing as giving one's life, dying for a cause, even if there's no fruit, if the cause is worth dying for, I guess?
Yeah, so, I had thought of both of those. I think those are both in China, and I'd heard about those, I guess, most of my adult life. And sometimes that will be the situation, particularly if you're talking about planting Christianity in another continent. I mean, that needs to be done. The thing you don't hear, you hear of those stories. You don't hear of maybe 10,000 where someone spent 20 years and nothing happened, and they spent another 20 and nothing still happened, and nothing happened after that. No one's going to write a book about that. Those are the ones that are forgotten. The exceptions are the ones that, we all hear about. So there is a time, but again, those were missionaries, I believe, in China. And people were taking the gospel to the first time to a foreign country. And I think something like that requires a bit more perseverance than an ordinary church plant. But thank you.
Yes, on that, I think a lot of times if we're not seeing fruit, we really should question whether we are doing it the way God wants us to or whether we're in the right spot. There are places that when you enter in, you're going to say, this is going to take a lifetime. And we're not going to penetrate this community without 40 years, without God doing some special miracle. There are communities like that. But if you feel like God has called you to a place and you feel like God is going to bring forth the fruit and it does not come, then we have some sort of fallacy here. Either He is calling us to die there, or something was missed in the calling. So there are times to go someplace. I think of the community I grew up in. We lived there for 20 years, and they still called us the new people. That's going to take a long time to break into a community like that. And we did see a fair amount of breaking into that community. We did not have any converts necessarily, but did contribute to the spiritual health of many people while we were there. But it's going to take time in some of those communities.
Someone else have a question? I really think, David, that sunk cost fallacy, I really think that's, I mean, I feel it myself. I hate to think about all the things, all the time and effort I put into something that ends up being worthless. And I think it just gets us. Really, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading about that, I'm surprised I'd never heard of that, because I look at fallacies a lot, and that was a new one to me. And I realized, yeah, that is human nature. You put a lot of work into something, you hate to acknowledge that, okay, this just wasn't successful. And again, in spiritual things, it can be a little harder. It's a little different maybe in business. It can be a little harder, but again, we can just be stubborn and not want to acknowledge, okay, either we're not the person that is going to be successful here, or our strategy isn't working, or, yeah, this is just really ground that is not productive.